Lecture 10, the Fine Arts Media Drawing. Lecture 10 begins section 3 of our textbook, the various fine arts media. Before us we see a painting called The Allegory of Painting, and it's by the Flemish artist Jean Vermeer from the 17th century. It's a small 4-foot oil painting. If we look carefully at the painting, and looking carefully again is the key to deciphering visual art, obviously you need to look carefully. If you look carefully, you'll see that this is an image with a curtain or a tapestry pulled to one side, letting us enter the scene. And there we see a painter, the back of a painter, and he's studying a model, a woman dressed in blue, holding a trumpet and a book. And you can look at the canvas he's painting on his easel, and he's painting her blue headdress, it looks like, and then you can see he's looking off at his subject, who's bathed in light while she's leaning against that wall. She's holding a trumpet and a book. If we look around the painting, we'll see on the back wall there's a gigantic map. That's cartography, the art of map making. We see the chandelier above, which would show us the art of metalworking. The woman herself is holding a trumpet and a book, literature and music. And then on the table in front of the model, we see a giant, looks like a marble or plaster cast head showing us sculpture. And then the tapestry in the foreground would show us the art of weaving. Anyway, the painting is titled The Allegory of Painting, and that means that this is supposed to be the personification of painting. Of course, the artist Vermeer is a painter, and he's again showing us more or less the artist in action, showing us he becomes, or the painter becomes, the subject, kind of autobiographical for the painting, for this work of art. In this new the new section of our book, the Fine Arts Media, we're going to talk about something called, again, medium and technologies. Um, each material presented by an artist, the bronze, the oil painting, the plaster, etc., they're each called the medium. The history of media used to create art is the history of various technologies employed by artists. These technologies have helped artists both to achieve the ends they desire more readily and also to discover new modes of creation and expression. Technology, the word technology, comes from the Greek logos, meaning word or discourse, and technique or techne from the Greek verb um, takin, meaning to make, to prepare, or to fabricate. So, a medium is, in this sense, a technique, a means for making art. It is both the specific material and also the process through which a given artist works and makes work of art. So again, the word medium is tricky because it's both the process and it's the material. So you make a drawing, so the medium is drawing, but the medium might also be, say, pencil on paper. So again, part 3 of our textbook will explore the various media of visual art, and we're going to begin with drawing. Lecture 10, drawing, and we're going to divide that into two categories, drawing as an art, and then talk about drawing materials, the specific media of drawing. Media and medium are the same word in a singular and plural sense. This is a late 15th century drawing by an unknown artist, and it shows you a young man making a drawing. Again, this is that wonderful subject that I enjoy of artists drawing other artists making art. So we can learn a lot about art history through that moment when the artists turn their subject matter onto their own activity. So again, first, drawing as an art. For the most part, we think of drawing as a transient medium. We draw sketches on paper and often quickly throw them away and start over. Until the end of the 15th century, drawing was viewed as a student medium. The young man shown in this illustration is drawing on a thin wooden plank, which could then be sanded down and used again. In the 15th and 16th century, paper was not readily available, and it was very expensive. We take paper for granted now, but before automation, paper was made by hand, and it was pretty expensive. So here, they would have an art student draw on a block of wood, and then when he was finished with his drawing, they would just sand it or plane it down and start again. In the old days, drawings were often done on parchment, which is a kind of paper. Looks like paper, but it's actually a very thin slice of leather of animal skin. And again, parchment was even more expensive than paper. But a lot of great Greek and Egyptian documents were done on parchment, which is especially prepared animal skin. So anyway, usually a student would draw on some temporary medium, like a piece of wood, and they would often copy a master's painting or sculpture, and in this way students learn the style of their master. However, things changed. The Renaissance gets credit for this huge turning point in so much of our cultural development in the West, but visual art, of course, as well. By the end of the 15th century, drawing came into its own, and it became recognized for the first time as an independent art medium, an independent art activity on its own. Before the 15th century, drawing was seen as a temporary, transient medium just for making sketches, to realize and consider ideas, and then to be discarded when you made the more permanent work of art in a permanent painting or a permanent fresco or permanent sculpture, etc. Um, a famous artist and writer from the Renaissance named Vasari saw in drawing what he considered to be the foundation for the Renaissance and Renaissance thinking itself. He had a large personal collection of drawings by all of his contemporary masters, including Raphael and Da Vinci and Michelangelo. And we consider him to be the first person to collect drawings and to understand that they had their own inherent artistic value. Vasari suggested that these drawings were dictionaries of the styles of the artists who had come before him. In a book, Vasari wrote Vasari wrote a book called Lives of the Painters, which is real important to art historians because it talks about painters that he knew personally at the time. Anyway, we see for the first time drawings being exhibited and displayed. Here's a drawing of Madonna and Child with Saint Anne and Infant Saint John the Baptist by Leonardo da Vinci. This is a drawing, and Vasari wrote about. Vasari owned this painting at one time. Now it's in a museum in London. But Vasari owned this drawing at one time. This drawing, which was not made to be a drawing to be shown to the public, but rather this drawing was made as a preparatory study by Da Vinci before he made this painting. We saw this painting a couple weeks ago in an earlier chapter. This is the study for that painting. When Vasari displayed this painting in an exhibition, the public really came to see it in great numbers, and, quote, there was amazement at the marvels he had created. This is the first account of a public display and public admiration for a drawing. Before then, drawings, again, were just considered to be temporary, preparatory sketches and temporary mediums where an artist would actually, believe it or not, just throw them in the garbage afterwards. They didn't have any value. They just were kind of they were just sketches, and they weren't dated, they weren't signed, and they weren't preserved. Fortunately, Vasari had the foresight to say, hey, drawings have their own inherent quality. And what he meant by that was that, and I'll try to stress this, drawings are not just drawings, of course, architects, sculptors, painters, printmakers, engineers, designers. We all make drawings as preparatory studies for other more complex works of art. We use drawings for what I like to call ideation, to organize our visual ideas and to work them through. Sketches. A lot of things start as simple sketches and drawings. However, what Vasari is trying to say is that within these preparatory sketches, there's kind of a unique inherent drawing quality to the drawings that shows us kind of almost like a notebook, shows us the artist's creative process, the artist's thinking method, and that there's something fresher and more alive and more full of, I think, life and fresh energy and dynamic energy than perhaps a finished painting or sculpture. So if you look at this Da Vinci drawing, you can really just see the speed and the fluency. And if you look down, like at the feet of the Virgin, all the feet of all the characters in this drawing, you see how quickly it was put together, and you feel that kind of you feel the energy as the image is just being assembled. Sometimes a finished painting can have kind of a staleness and a tension, and it seems almost like it's frozen. A drawing can have a really free quality where air seems to enter and breathe through the work. We feel the energy and the life that the artist made when they made the drawing. And again, in a painting, at times they can get really tight and locked down, almost like they're frozen moments. This one seems more capable of movement. Here's a drawing by Da Vinci. We've seen a number of his drawings this semester. This is a study for a sleeve, and fluidity and spontaneity are really a dynamic part of Da Vinci's drawings. This is just a study for a sleeve, and it's just an arm an outreaching arm. But you see this spiraling energy that wraps around the garment on this figure, and it shows us Da Vinci's fascination with movement and the forces of nature. So again, if I can try to restate my point, um, this drawing has kind of it has some of the inherent qualities of drawing that make drawing unique from painting or sculpture or photography or whatnot, the other mediums. Drawing can show us an immediacy and a dynamics which can be kind of frozen and slowed down in certainly sculpture and painting, because they're so slow and burdensome. Drawing is so immediate and spontaneous. And again, Da Vinci is fascinated by motion, and he obsessed with the movement of water. And we might even say that this movement is depicted in this drawing of a sleeve. But in this next drawing by Da Vinci, we see a hurricane over horsemen and trees, and if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you see a bunch of tiny horses and horsemen running through a kind of a forest that's being pushed over by a heavy winds. And then above, with the same attention to detail that Da Vinci drew the horses and the trees with, he's drawn this storm, this deluge, the great flood, signifying perhaps the end of the world from the Bible. But again, you saw this kind of swirling line depiction in the sleeve drawing, and now we see again this swirling line and energy technique drawn in the sky here of the same drawing. And these are some of the kind of unique qualities of drawing that allow us to kind of peer into what drives the artist's imagination, kind of like a visual journal or notebook or diary. It could show us some of the it can show us hopefully what Da Vinci was thinking about and what he was curious about and what he was considering as he made these drawings. Again, part of the unique quality of drawing is that yes, it was primarily and is primarily still a medium that's used for ideation, for visual consideration, and for preparatory drawings. But starting in the Renaissance, for the first time, drawings became a medium on their own, and artists and art critics and art lookers, the art audience, started to understand that drawing had its own unique quality that perhaps was merited consideration. Here's a list of drawing key terms that we'll talk about in this remaining discussion. Again, medium is in any art activity, the medium is what materials you use to make that work of art. When it's finished, it's in that medium. So at a cocktail party, often a bunch of artists and art historians will be sitting around, and one artist will say to another, "So, I hear you're a sculptor. What's your medium?" And your answer would be, "Oh, I carve marble, or I work in bronze." It's kind of a nerdy artist question, but the medium is what material or materials you work in. Medium is plural, media is singular. Television is a media. You can be a media major in college, and that's mass media. You would major in television production and advertising. That's media as well. Different kind of media. We have now two drawings by Raphael, who's another member of the great giants of the Renaissance. And now we're talking about drawing materials. Drawing materials are generally divided into two categories: the dry media, which includes metal point, chalk, charcoal, graphite, and pastel, and the liquid media, which include pen and ink, oil paint, brush wash, watercolor, and acrylic. And we're going to go over these specifically in the remainder of this discussion. Typically, most media consists of pigments, which is the coloring agent, and a binder, which holds them together. And the best way to remember pigments and binders, I think, is, or the easiest way to go back to your basic art making for you all when you're in kindergarten, is Crayola crayons. I think you've all used crayons. Crayons have color, which is the binder, and they have color, which is the pigment, and they have binder, which is the wax, because your crayons are kind of like candles. They're made of wax. So a Crayola crayon has a colored pigment, which is what makes it a specific color, and then it has the wax, which is the binder. You have to hold that pigment together. You just can't have a handful of pigment. It has to be held together somehow. This is Raphael's Alba Madonna. This is a drawing. We have two drawings to look at, which also curiously are on two sides of the same page. Um, Again, back in the 16th century, paper was expensive, and artists weren't making these drawings for the public to see. They were making these drawings for their own private consideration. So this is a preparatory study for this circular painting that Raphael makes. So again, in a series of studies for the album Madonna, Raphael demonstrates the ways in which artists use drawings in planning a work of art. In the studies illustrated in this image and the next image, Raphael works on both sides of a single sheet of paper. On one side, he's drawn a model from life and posed him as the Madonna. He's using a man. His sketching continues on the other side of the paper, where he considers the composition with all the figures included. A circle frames the group in an effort to visualize the composition's placement in the final painting. The speed and fluency of the drawings are quite apparent, and they are able to quickly capture the gesture of the body. And that's again what I was trying to talk about with what makes drawings unique, this gesture. When I teach a drawing class, we try to explain to students that you have to draw twice what you see, and you have to exaggerate the movement and the angles of the body. Because again, at the end of the day, it's just some lines on a sheet of paper. It's never going to have the same dynamics as a living, breathing person. Well, how can you compose that, and how can you heighten that visual experience? And that's by exaggerating this gesture, exaggerating what you see. So Raphael might well have taken the advice of Leonardo da Vinci, one of his contemporaries, who suggested again that the artist should sketch quickly to capture the precise movement and subtle gestures that will indicate the true emotional state of the subjects. So, although these preparatory sketches result in a spectacular painting, it's these preparatory sketches that, according to Da Vinci, are necessary to capture this true emotional state and this precise, subtle gesture of the activity. So here we see a preparatory drawing where Raphael is working from a male model, and you see a lot of contour lines and outlines and hatching and cross-hatching as he considers the shape and the form. But if you look at the speed of that right arm, it's not even complete, but we still see the kind of the palm, outreaching palm pointing upwards. Some elements he's considering more carefully than others because he's just making his own kind of visual decisions. You know, how should this piece be composed? Then on the flip side of the paper, because again paper is so expensive, he's got the Christ child in his mother's arm there. He's turned his model, who was male, into a female because he's obviously fluent and skilled in anatomy. And now he's added a circle around it as he's made the decision perhaps to make this a circular composition. You see in the top two drawings he's got a mother and child embracing, and it's in a rectangle. And then somewhere along the line he makes the decision to go into a circular composition. So again, back to the other point, these drawings, which were never intended to be seen publicly, they were just private little 16 by 10 inch drawings in his notebook perhaps, they show us his creative process and his editing and his decision making as they happen and lead up to this final painting, which I'll show you now. Here's the final painting. You had the privilege of seeing the preparatory drawings. There may have been more than just two preparatory drawings. There could have been dozens before he got this far. And they give us kind of a behind the scenes kind of like when you rent a DVD and you get the director's extras behind the scenes cut, kind of the making of. They help us to kind of understand just what went into the thought process. And if I can stress now, as we look at this beautiful and vibrant painting, as wonderful as it is and as complete as it is, and if I had to pick which one I was going to be able to own and hang in my living room, I think I would pick this painting over those drawings. But one of the distinctions between those drawings and this painting, and if I can, again, by stressing this, help you understand what's different about drawings and paintings, is those drawings have a freshness and they have a life and an energy that moves through them. Perhaps because they're incomplete and they're perpetually incomplete, but because of the casualness and the speed and the freedom in those drawings, you get this kind of energy and this almost like you can feel the breeze moving through the figures. That in this painting, although it's a superior painting, and again I would hang this in the living room before the drawings, I suppose, if I could have either one for free. This has a more frozen feeling. This seems more static and frozen, and the drawings have a different kind of spontaneity and gestural movement through them. Da Vinci tells us that it's that gesture and that subtle spontaneity which has to be captured first in a drawing and then transferred into this painting to give the painting the movement that it does have. If you look at the Jesus holding the cross in St. John the Baptist, you know, the kind of lean of the Jesus, the gesture of the child, um, is only there because of the preparatory drawings which have allowed Raphael to consider the composition. So now we're going to talk about the various media, and we're going to start with the dry media. Metal point is the first dry media we're going to talk about. Metal point is um, kind of a it was a common drawing technique in the late 15th and early 16th century. It's not very popular anymore. I don't know any artists who still work in metal point or silver point, as it was called. But anyway, to make one of these drawings in metal point, an artist used a specially prepared sheet of paper. It had a special white paint put on it, and then you used a stylus, which is kind of the holder for your lead or your pastel or whatnot, kind of a holder, and then you actually used um, a stylus with a very very thin piece of gold or silver or platinum, and as you would draw on the paper in silver point or metal point, the metal kind of tattoos the paper and actually kind of is melted right into it. This drawing by this painting by Roger van der Weyden is Saint Luke drawing the Virgin and Child, and this is an oil painting that shows us again an artist drawing. Well, the drawing tool in Saint Luke's hand is a metal point, but this is not a drawing. Let me jump to the next image. Dry media. The next image is again by Raphael, and this is Saint Paul rending his garments, and this is an example of a metal point where we see um, and a metal point doesn't lend itself too well to photographic reproduction, but a metal point is like a tattoo on your arm. A metal point is this very very precise line that melts into the page because it's actually the metal, the silver or the platinum, kind of melting into the page in this chemical reaction with a specially prepared paper surface. Metal point is a very slow and patient material. It requires great skill and patience, like tattooing. And like tattooing, you cannot erase. So you cannot erase in metal point. It's a one-shot deal. And again, I don't know any living artists that still use this medium. It's the kind of thing that chemists and art conservators would use in a museum to restore works of art. I'm sure there's some eccentric artists out there who still use it, but it's very, very slow and laborious, and we really only know about it. I only know about it because I look back at the history of art. So amongst the dry mediums, first we have metal point or silver point. You cannot erase with it. The lines go down really slowly, and they're never that vivid of a line. They're always kind of metal on the page, so you get this actual subtle silver line. This is a black chalk drawing. It's made with black chalk and highlighted with white chalk on brown prepared paper. And this is a study for a prophet seen from the front by Bartolomeo. And it's not concerned with the subject's face or hands, but rather with his garments, which are rendered with great tonality. Um, so, whereas metal point, which we spoke about a moment ago, is concerned with delineation and the use of line, softer media such as chalk and charcoal allow an artist to achieve a sense of volume, or this three-dimensional modeling of light and dark. The artist here uses chiaroscuro, which is that subtle play between light and dark that we discussed in the past, to achieve this kind of three-dimensional illusion on the page. The entire area can be produced by drawing with the soft edge of the chalk and then blending with the hand or a soft cloth, the fingertips, kind of smudging, I think maybe you called it when you took a drawing class in high school. So kind of a grayish sheet of paper, black chalk, and then some white chalk to achieve the highlights. By the middle of the 16th century, natural chalks derived from red, white, and black mineral deposits were fitted into holders, called styluses, and shaved to a point. And with these chalks, it became possible to realize the most gradual transitions from light to dark by adjusting the amount of pressure in your hand, by pushing very hard to get a deep, deep line, a dense, dark value, or subtly laying off and having a subtle gray, and then you could even blend them together with gentle rubbing. In this painting, which is done in the 20th century by George O'Keeffe, I'm sorry, I said painting, I meant drawing. In this drawing by George O'Keeffe, we see a study in light and dark that seems comparable to a black and white photograph. Because of its tendency to smudge easily, charcoal was not used during the Renaissance very much, except in something called synopy, which is this way of making an image that is then transferred to a fresco. Um, so now I'm jumping back a second, but synopy or synopy is this kind of like it's a way of making a full-size drawing, which is then transferred to a fresco wall. And we'll talk about fresco in a couple of lectures when we get to painting. But fresco is a painting made on a wet plaster wall, kind of like a mural, or exactly a mural. And what you would do with charcoal in the Renaissance is you would make a drawing, and then you would bring this full-size paper drawing to the plaster wall, and then you would have little holes cut in the side of it, kind of like a pattern for making a dress, for like a dressmaker's pattern, and you would kind of pounce some charcoal dust through the holes in this full-size pattern, and it would give you kind of a subtle version of your drawing on the wall, and then you could take your paint right to the plaster. Um, so before the modern era, charcoal wasn't used too much for drawings. This is a charcoal drawing made by George O'Keeffe in 1933, and the reason why it looks so crisp and so wonderful is because of the artist's, of course, expert ability, but also because of something called fixative, which is essentially hairspray or some kind of synthetic resin, which you could spray over the drawing and seal in this very, very fragile medium from smudging. So fixative seals the pigment in place and makes it less likely to smudge or be distorted. 1933 again, here we see another female artist, Kate Colwitz, and her self-portrait drawing. And it's another great example of a charcoal drawing. It's on a sheet of paper. And what's really nice about this drawing is we can see the tremendous expressive potential of the medium. The medium for this drawing is charcoal on paper. You can see that much of the drawing was done by dragging the charcoal on its side to get that jagged arm between the artist's chin and her hand. That kind of, she used the side of the charcoal and just kind of dragged it up and down like an EKG line, up and down, up and down. But also by using the pointed edge of that same tool, she has the subtlety of her facial expression and her eyes and her nose. Again, this is a self-portrait, so this is the artist looking into a mirror while she makes this drawing. And then even the subtlety of her fingernails and fingertips. And if you look very carefully at her fingertips, you can see she's holding a little piece of charcoal in her hand. So I think as she completed the drawing, she took the very last bit of charcoal left and put it right into the fingertips. So it's this really highly expressive drawing which shows us the range of effects that can be achieved through charcoal in both the subtlety and the delicacy of the facial expressions, the lips, the eyes, the nose, the fingertips. And this very same tool can be used on its edge to make these rich, broad gestural lines, which would be really very abstracted if you remove the if you covered the hand and the face with your hands. You just see this kind of jagged line in between. But your brain knows that, well, between your hand and your shoulder must be your arm. So your brain tells you that's an arm, even though it doesn't look exactly like an arm. And again, that expressiveness is really apparent in the dynamic use of the material. Um, concert, Cafe Concert by Seurat. We saw Seurat, the impressionist who made these pointillist paintings. We saw the Sunday in the Park painting a couple of weeks ago in our lectures, and there we saw that kind of optical color mixing, the idea of the colors blending together, not on the page but in the viewer's eye. Well, this is a drawing by Seurat, and the same thing's happening here without chroma, without color. It's happening just tonally. Um, this is this wonderful atmospheric view of a cafe concert where we see the orchestra and the band pit with his baton and his sheet music just in this kind of haze. And then we see a woman on stage with her arms bent and wearing a big dress, and you see her just singing. You can see her mouth open there. And then all this is radiating from this dramatic stage light above us that's almost like the sun that's illuminating this very atmospheric and misty kind of room. You can almost feel the smoke that must have been there in this Parisian cafe concert in the 1888. The previous piece was made of Conti crayon, which is um, a material that comes right out of the earth. Um, in uh, let's talk about graphite first. Graphite was discovered in 1564 in England, and this piece, which we see by Vijay uh, Selmans, is made of pencil on paper, graphite. Uh, People say that pencils have lead in them. Pencils do not have lead in them. Pencils never had lead in them. Perhaps people say pencils have lead in them because graphite looks a little bit like lead, or maybe they say it from the ancient idea of the metal point, where you would actually draw with lead or silver. But pencils have graphite in them, and graphite is carbon, pure carbon. Um, this drawing is made, we call pencil on paper or graphite on paper. The prior drawing was made with Conti crayon. Graphite was discovered in England in 1564 when black chalk became increasingly difficult to find because you have to mine chalk. It's a mineral that comes out of the ground. So the British in the 16th century made or discovered and started producing graphite for making drawings. Um, During the Napoleonic Wars, when the English and the French were battling each other, um, the British would not share their graphite with the French. So Napoleon asked the Frenchman Nicolas Jacques Conté to find a substitute for graphite. So he uh, discovered or created the Conté crayon, named after himself. The Conté crayon is a mixture of refined graphite and clay, which results in a very soft point and a nice tool for drawing. The Seurat drawing is made with this Conté crayon. If you go to an art supply store now and ask for a Conté crayon, you can still get Conté crayons, and they come really in all the earth tones because they're again a combination of graphite and clay of course comes from the earth, so you can get black, white, but also subtle umbras and siennas and earth tones that you would see in nature. Again, by controlling the softness or hardness of the point, a great range of light and darkness is possible. A moment ago we saw the Seurat Cafe concert where you see that real range of tonal possibilities. If an artist presses down more firmly, you get the dark areas of the orchestra pit, and if you lighten up, you get the light atmospheric quality in the upper area. So the tonal approach of the cafe concert is in contrast to the Vijay Selman's photorealistic drawing called Untitled Ocean, which you see here. Here is one of a series of small photorealistic drawings that the artist has created using a different hardness of graphite for each work, which again further indicates the possibility of the medium. So this is again a pencil drawing, a graphite drawing of the sea. So graphite drawings can be erased. One of the big things about pencils, which you all know from your taking Scantron exams, is that you have an eraser on the end and you can put a mark down and then you can take the mark away with an eraser. This is a drawing made by Larry Rivers, and the subject of the drawing is his friend, a contemporary painter named William de Kooning. And what's interesting about this drawing is not so much what Larry Rivers has drawn, but what he's taken away. You can see that he's removed, looks like one of the eyes, both of the hands, one of the legs, one of the shoulders. So what becomes expressive about this drawing is not so much what Larry Rivers has drawn, but what he's undrawn, what he's erased. So you have the idea of, and I think it's obvious, but pencil and graphite drawings can be erased. And sometimes what you take away from a drawing can add to its expressive quality. This again is a fairly traditional drawing, except he's employing erasing as an integral means of mark making. So it's not so much what's there as what's been taken away. I think the human brain likes it when you have to kind of fill the blanks in and figure out what was there or what should be there. It gives you something. It gives you a more active, an active role in visual experience. The last drawing by Larry Rivers was of William de Kooning. This drawing is by William de Kooning, and it's called Seated Woman. It's a pretty horrific drawing. I mean, the woman seems to have her throat cut or torn as the sheet of paper is changed, and she looks kind of monstrous. But this is still an example of a pencil drawing, which has some pastels used there to add to the color. This is an interesting drawing in that it looks pretty scary and monstrous, certainly highly expressive. It doesn't seem to show us so much happiness towards women. People have argued that de Kooning had a problem with women. But let's jump to the next painting for a next drawing for a comparison. But remember this drawing. Remember the de Kooning drawing as we compare it to the Degas drawing, and remember how aggressive it is and how unbeautiful it is. This is a drawing by Edgar Degas. Degas is considered a master of pastel drawing. He's made this drawing called "After the Bath, Woman Drying Herself," and this is a more, I think, commonly agreed beautiful drawing than the Degas drawing. This might be a drawing you'd like to hang in your house, as opposed to the de Kooning drawing, which is a little more horrific and far less concerned with things like beauty. This is more traditional, if you will. Um, we're talking now about the drawing medium of pastel on paper. Um, so the color in the de Kooning drawing is a result of pastel, which is a chalk medium with colored pigment and a non-greasy binder. Um, the harder the stick, the less intense its color, which is why we associate the word pastel with pale color. During Easter, you might wear, in the springtime, you might wear pastel colors. They're kind of faded colors, pink, baby blue. Those are all kind of pastel colors, and that they're called that because pastels are coloring agents artists can use that are dry and kind of hard, and they don't give you vibrant pigments. They give you rather faded pigments. So the lack of binder in pastel makes them extremely fragile, and again, the drawing has to be fixed to the paper so it doesn't fall off the page. In fact, a special ribbed paper is produced specifically to help the medium of pastels stay on the page. When you work with pastels, you use a paper that has a very rough tooth. Um, Tooth is kind of the roughness of a page. Uh, your textbook has a very low tooth and it's very smooth. Wax paper has a very smooth surface and no tooth at all. Paper, Sandpaper has a very high tooth. If you drew with a piece of pastel on a piece of sandpaper, it would really dig into all the nooks and crannies, and the mark would stay there. So again, an artist uses a specially prepared pastel paper that has a high tooth, which allows the pastel pigments to stick into those little nooks and crannies, and then an artist will come back with fixative and spray the drawing to seal it from smudging or falling off the page. If you look at this drawing, the female figure who's drying herself, if you look at her back, for example, we can see some unexpected colors. We see pinks and maybe even some violets and some reds, all worked in there to make her kind of translucent skin tone. Those would have turned muddy and kind of ugly had the artist not sprayed this with coats of fixative between mark making. So you need to use fixative, which is essentially hairspray, to seal the drawing as you work on it. You don't just use fixative when you're finished with pastels, you use it while you're working because the colors will muddy together if you don't. So again, Degas stands out as the most proficient and inventive artist to use pastel, and he was attracted to the medium because of its immediacy and the fact that it had this unfinished quality that I've been trying to talk about in this kind of the kind of life and energy that a drawing can have that a painting kind of doesn't have. A painting can seem so frozen, but these colored drawings, these pastel drawings, have kind of an unfinished kind of life to them. Like many of Degas' works, this image depicts a woman from a voyeuristic standpoint, and this is where I'd like to make a comparison between the previous image by William de Kooning, which is kind of ugly and scary, and Edward Degas. Just as a point of a historic relevance, you know, both artists are dead. This painting's made in 1890. The de Kooning's piece is made in I don't know 1950. 1952. But what's important to understand is that that William de Kooning lived lived a long life and was married to Elaine de Kooning, one woman for 80 years, and he was a very interesting artist who made some provocative artwork, which wasn't always beautiful, but that's what he did. He was a loyal, monogamous man. Edward Degas, on the other hand, lived in kind of indulgent upper class Parisian society in the 1890s, and the woman who we see here is definitely a prostitute and probably less than 18 years old. So you've also got this kind of creepy, kind of illicit idea that Degas and Monet and Toulouse-Lautrec and all these kind of French upper class, upper middle class impressionist artists are kind of lecherous, kind of I wouldn't call them perverts, but they're creepy guys who hang around brothels and this kind of underworld of French society, and they drink absinthe, and they're not. So we see a romantic drawing, but we don't necessarily understand the underpinnings of it culturally. This is still a man looking at a woman who he's paid money to while she's taking a bath. I don't even want to imagine what she's taking a bath for, and what his whole fetish is. But all of these French impressionists, treated women at a time in society when women couldn't vote, and when prostitution was an unfortunate career path for lots of people. So again, although de Kooning's drawing is less traditionally beautiful, uh, Degas' behavior is traditionally ugly. So I'm just trying to point out that there's what you see, and then there's what's behind the image. Mary Cassatt is an American painter who learned a great deal about pastel drawings from Degas. I'm not sure if she was friends with him, but she certainly was aware of his artwork, and she was impressed by the looseness and freedom of his drawing. And she took that freedom, and I think took it to an even greater extent. Here we see a drawing by the American painter Mary Cassatt, young mother, daughter, and son. And the gestures of her pastel line again and again exceed the boundaries of the form that contain them, and there's really this kind of explosive energy coming from the figure. If you look at the child in the center and all the skin tones of all the figures, you see this unexpected collision of pinks and blues. And then again, because of the fixative that sprays these pastels and seals them, the colors don't get blurry and muddy. They stay kind of vibrant and separate, and it creates this even the mother's dressed with the yellows and oranges together because of the fixative which seals each color. These pastels don't blend together, but rather kind of overlap each other and create this kind of vibrant energy. So again, it's a pastel drawing on paper. And if I can just repeat, it's a pastel drawing made on a paper which has a high tooth or a rough tooth. That allows the pastel marks to stick in those grooves because the page needs tooth. And then these chalky pastels are sealed to the page with fixative, which both keeps the work from smudging, but also keeps the colors from blurring together. Richard Serra made the tilted arc sculpture, the gigantic steel sculpture we saw in the first couple of chapters. He makes drawings as well. Often artists work in a variety of mediums. They'll work in one primary medium, and then they'll have a secondary medium. I'm a sculptor, but I also make drawings, so I work in a variety of medium. This is from a series called Rounds by Richard Serra, and it's a drawing made with an oil stick, and an oil stick and oil pastel have an oily binder. They're kind of like lipstick. They have a real kind of they're wetter, and they're a little more luscious. They really kind of melt into the page like lipstick. This is a drawing by Richard Serra. We'd say this is non-objective for sure. Serra is a sculptor who works with big macho materials like steel, and when he makes drawings, it's no surprise that the drawings are so massive and so heavy. There's kind of an impasto mark to this, which we can't see exactly because we're seeing a photograph, but you can really see the kind of ground-in medium. He's kind of mashing the circle in. Clifton Chenier is the king of Zydeco, who we might know because of our Louisiana familiarity. But in this series of drawings that Richard Serra made called Rounds, he's kind of focused on lots of great American musicians, and he's making this vivid black circle on the page in a way kind of expressing the the density of the surface becomes kind of a parallel for the both the sculptural work that Richard Serra makes, his big heavy steel pieces, but also it's meant to suggest the density of the sound exploding out of this history of American music. So it's kind of this density, a drawing material that becomes almost sculptural in its thickness and this impasto mark making, but also the subject or the title, Clifton Chenier, and he's trying to, I guess, show us this kind of the density and the intensity of this exploding sound, this visual weight that hopefully parallels kind of loud music, I assume. Beverly Buchanan gets a double-page spread in your textbook, and this little works in progress section. She is an interesting artist who I believe passed away a couple of years ago. She works in rural Georgia, and she works with pastels, although she works with oil pastels. Oil pastels again flow more readily onto the paper, and they adhere to the surface better because they're like lipstick. They have this oily binder. Uh, Pastel oil stick drawings are central to the art of Buchanan, whose work is about the makeshift shacks that dot the southern landscape of Georgia. Buchanan started to photograph the shacks, which you see here, a photograph of one of the shacks, and then she made some sculptures of these shacks. But for the sake of our discussion, she's made some drawings of these shacks. So here's one of these oil pastel drawings of the shacks, which she's photographed, and she's made kind of sculptural assemblages, kind of homages to. And now we see this really energetic drawing with vivid colors, trying to express and to embody the same energy and spirit that the shacks and the people who live in the shacks had themselves. Um, your textbook talks at a great length about Buchanan, and she's trying to capture the energy and vitality of the individuals who lived in these ramshackled houses, many of who were long gone, and but nonetheless lived this very humble and meager life in these places. And she's kind of returning to these shacks that she photographs before they fall down through age or through development of different regions of the country, but she's trying to capture this kind of humble moment from the simple past and to kind of celebrate it with some kind of energy being presented through this vivid color scheme and these kind of fanciful giant flowers which you see in this drawing. This is an example, though, of a drawing made with oil pastel. That more or less concludes the dry medium, and now we're going to talk about the liquid media. The liquid media, as the name would imply, really means any drawing media that has water or some kind of liquid material in it. The Holy Family with the Kneeling Monastic Saint by Serrani. It's a great pen and ink drawing. So if you looked at this on your own, I hope you would notice that the mark making here has more viscosity. It has more liquid to it. There's a quality to liquid mark making which can only be described as being viscous or liquid. Pen and ink. During the Renaissance, most drawings were made with iron gall ink, which is a black ink that turned brown with age. So originally it was black, but with time it turned brown. The quill pen used by most Renaissance artists allowed for far greater variation of line and texture than was possible with metal point. The quill pen is literally a feather. In this drawing, the Holy Family with Monastic Saint by Serrani, the ink quill line is thickened or thin depending on the artist's manipulation of the stylist. Ink also proved to be a more fluid and expressive means to render light and shadow than the elaborate and tedious hatching and cross-hatching process. Pen and ink were faster and more expressive, I believe, than the dry mediums. In the liquid mediums, you can get more flash and flow. You can kind of throw shade and tone around in an expressive way that I think you can see in the work as you kind of look at the robes of these individuals. So again, this is an example of a pen and ink drawing. And we would say this is not dry, but of the liquid media, or wet. Jean Dubuffet is a 20th century French painter and sculptor, and here we see a drawing of his. And if nothing else, we see it's called Corpse de Dame, and it looks to be, although it's highly abstracted and expressive, it looks to be a female figure. We see breasts and a head and eyes up top. The artists used thick and thin lines in a very spontaneous, I would say frantic manner. Dubufay's drawing, while seeming to, again, be derogatory towards women, um, might actually be more aimed at at attacking the academic notion of drawing. It seems like he's more angry at just the academic conservative notion of drawing. He's trying to make uh, a more spontaneous drawing that maybe makes fun of or pokes fun at the traditional discipline of exact anatomy and drawing, and is more about a style that he calls um, automatism. This kind of spontaneous approach to just drawing whatever comes to your mind, kind of like the surrealists in this, just drawing whatever comes from your subconscious. But again, this is a pen and ink drawing, liquid medium. Here's Giovanni Tiepolo, who's the king of the ink wash. He's the giant of ink wash. And the difference between ink wash and pen and ink is in what is this thing called ink wash. Ink wash is when you take your ink and you dilute it in different concentrations of water, so you have kind of a bunch of little cups in front of you. In the old days, they would use oyster shells or mussel shells to mix their colors. And in this case, instead of color, you have different degrees of value. So maybe each cup has a half an ounce of water in it, and then in one he'll have 2 drops of ink, one will have 5 drops of ink, another he'll have 10 drops of ink. And the more ink you add to the water, the darker the ink wash becomes. So then by employing these different degrees of tone, of light and dark, Tiepolo comes over his very simple graphite sketch with his watercolor brush, and he slops down these ink washes and adds a variety of different darknesses. You can see some areas sit in shadow, some in highlight, some have, if you count the different kinds of grayness on this image, you can go from very, very dark in the right-hand corner bottom to different degrees as they splash over the garments on the figures. This is, again, an example of a drawing done with ink wash in an expert way, and it seems like it was just done in seconds, just the kind of the simple pencil drawing first, then come back with these different tonal ink washes, and then just to kind of lay them down just where light has hit that woman holding the child there, the Blessed Virgin holding the Jesus, as the 3 wise men show up here to adore the Savior, and you just see all this. It seems as if this artist has captured this moment with a camera, just this kind of snapshot of this bright sunny day, and these 1, 2, 3 kings, the bowing down in front of the child, and presenting gifts to the baby Jesus. So here's ink wash again. Rembrandt, we saw his autographic line in the etching that showed us the 3 crosses a few chapters ago, a few lectures ago. But now we see Rembrandt working with a different tool. Instead of working with a rigid line, he's working with a brush. So whereas an artist can work with many different tools, when an artist works with a brush, you get a very, very speedy mark. This mark really borders on the calligraphic. It looks almost like Asian calligraphy. But you can see that with a point, Rembrandt's able to get the exact eyes and nose of the figure, and the subtle contour of the shape of her head, and then he gets more slapdash as he expresses the kind of the bed she's laying down on. So again, a variety of marks can be made with an ink brush. There's a real sense of immediacy and spontaneity in this sleeping woman drawing by Rembrandt, made with a brush and ink. The Poets, Li Bo walking and chanting a poem by Liang Kai from the 12th century is another drawing from a hand scroll, and it's again a brush and ink. And again, just to point out the variety of mark making available with brush and ink, if you look at the eyes, nose, and beard of this figure, that's done with the same brush that's then used to make broader gestural strokes for the whole body of the figure. So you've got this range of mark making available with one tool. And that's part of the excitement and dynamics that I would attribute to brush and ink. Again, the fine detailed work that define the face, and then the quick strokes of the diluted ink wash that define the poet's robe become very, very expressive. So that was the dry and the wet, and now we'll talk about some experimental media very briefly. Here's Henri Matisse, in a 1952 piece called Venus. Um, rather than using charcoal or graphite or ink or brush or wash or pastels, here Matisse has made a drawing, but he's used a scissor to make his drawing. He's used a scissor. Here's a quote from Matisse. He feels that with scissors he can acquire more feeling for line than pen or charcoal. Sketching with the scissors, Matisse discovered, lets him get to what he called the essence of form. In fact, these cutouts that he made dominated his work from 51 till 54 when he died. He also was bedridden and his vision was failing, so part of it was a matter of just being able to keep making art. But cutting out these beautiful and very abstracted shapes of the human figure out of blue paper and laying them on white paper became very, very, very expressive. So although this is, we might call this a collage, we can also call it a drawing because, again, it's primarily concerned with line, and it's done here directly with scissors. He's literally drawing with scissors, cutting paper out as he goes. So this would be an experimental medium, or at least a non-traditional medium, although it's still done 50 years ago. Um, William Kendridge is a fascinating artist who makes beautiful charcoal drawings. And your textbook doesn't help us with William Kendridge's work very much because what you don't see here is that Kendridge um, makes videos. He makes beautiful animations, but not in the kind of Disney sense. They're not slick and glossy and full of color. He makes mostly black and white animations, and he makes drawings with charcoal on paper, and then he erases those drawings and he modifies them, and he keeps a video camera above them so he gets to snap still shots. So he essentially makes, well, not essentially, he exactly makes animation through moving his charcoal drawings around. So seeing this one still image doesn't really help very much. Your textbook has 4 images that give you a little more sense of the narrative, but this is just this crazy story about the artist's brain, and it turns into a stone, and somebody comes and falls in love with it. It's a crazy, surreal kind of fantasy vision. But what's important to know is that there are artists who still follow the traditional notion of drawing, in this case charcoal drawing, and William Kendridge will spend an entire week just to make 40 seconds of animation from the evolution of these charcoal drawings. So again, they play with memory and whatnot, but they're kind of a crossover between animation and rendered charcoal drawing, and they're pretty fascinating to watch because you always sometimes you see the artist's hand actually erasing a bit of the drawing, and they're kind of low tech but very, very beautiful and very expressive. Again, this is another still from the video, so they're not that helpful in that we don't see them in their temporal form. We don't see the beginning, the middle, and the end. But this is from a collaborative work by Teresa Duncan and Jeremy Blake called The History of Glamour, and it's this drawing, which is a still from this 40-minute video, which is done in the style of anime, which is this Japanese kind of pop culture drawing technique. Um, Again, just maybe it's here to tell us about the evolution of drawings and how they appear in different ways. I think you're all familiar with Japanese anime and its style and look. Artists kind of reach from popular culture and bring things back into fine art as they move along. But again, this is only a still from some elaborate piece. I'm ending with this image by Raphael, which we saw already, just to point out again that primarily drawing is a medium used by artists to consider and design what they're going to do, and to let them do this thing I call ideation, where they draw and consider and then redraw and reconsider. But also on its own, drawing has a spontaneous energy and quality that I think gets frozen in a sculpture or a building, architecture, or a painting. It gets frozen, and in some way, drawing becomes the most expressive and the most personal. It's the most we'll ever see of an artist's creative process, kind of behind the scenes of them thinking and whatnot. It wasn't until the Renaissance that Vasari started presenting drawings as art. Before then, drawings were just done as working drawings, and they were discarded or destroyed until the finished product was made. But again, this is a Raphael drawing, which led to that wonderful painting of the same subject, and it has its own inherent qualities, which I don't think. I think the painting exceeds in ways of color and other capacities, but the drawing has its own strength as well. Um, we're going to conclude now with this slide, and I'm just going to go down the terms to make sure I've covered them all. Medium is the materials you use to make the work of art. Today we talked about the drawing medium. Charcoal is a dry. Charcoal is a charred wood, usually willow branches that are cooked in an oven, like charcoal you'd use in a barbecue, but long and skinny, and you mark a page with them. Metal point is that ancient technique where you have a specially prepared sheet of paper, and you actually come in with metal, silver or platinum or gold, and you draw on the page, and it kind of melts into the paper, and you cannot erase in metal point. Sketch is that spontaneous drawing, which hopefully captures the gesture of the scene and the subtlety of the scene, which Leonardo da Vinci tells us we should try to capture before we make a painting to understand the true gesture and movement and the subtleties of the figures. Binder and pigment go together. Binder and pigment are the pigment is the color, which could be black, and the binders would hold it together. I mentioned the acrylic crayon. There you have the colored pigment and the waxy crayon as the binder. We talked about the dry media and the wet media in the various incarnations. Those are the two kinds of drawings. Graphite and Conti crayon are dry media, so is charcoal and metal point. Those are all dry media. Graphite is pure carbon. It's what's in your pencil. It never had lead in it. There's no lead in graphite. Conti crayon is a composite of clay and graphite, invented by the French, by Nicolas Conté. Fixative is what you use to hold charcoal down to a page. It's also used to hold pastel down to a page so it won't smudge and so the colors don't blend together. Chalk pastels and oil pastels are kind of fancy crayons. Chalk pastels have a more faded look because they're drier pigments. Degas is the king of pastels. Oil pastels have a more vibrant color, kind of like lipstick. They have an oily binder inside them that makes them more vivid. Ink wash is when you now we're into liquid media. Pen and ink and ink wash are liquid media. There you obviously have water as the binder for the pigment, and then when the water evaporates, the pigment's left on the page. Ink wash is the subtle values of gray you'll see on a page. We saw the Tiepolo drawing a little while ago, where you saw the various tones for ink wash. And then pen and ink is just that, like an ink pen that you might be holding in your hand. Pen and ink is another more viscous way of making a mark. You also have brush and ink. I don't have brush and ink listed here, but you can use pen and ink or brush and ink, and then ink wash as well. Okay, that concludes lecture 10 on drawing. There'll be no quiz after this lecture, but there will be one following the next chapter on printmaking.